The 5th of August, 2011. A glacier in Svalbard, 600 miles from the North Pole. 80 people asleep in tents on the ice. Somebody starts shouting two words: bear attack. A 31-year-old expedition leader named Michael Reed comes out of his tent, holding the only rifle in that camp. A Mauser bolt-action, the most successful infantry rifle ever built, chambered for a cartridge that has killed everything on this planet. He can see the bear. It is standing on top of one of the boys. 3 years later, under oath at an inquest in Salisbury, England, he describes what happened next in the flat, careful language of a man who has replayed it 10,000 times. He cocked the rifle. He aimed carefully, because the animal was close and he did not want to hit the boy underneath it. He took a carefully aimed shot at the bear's chest. The rifle did not fire. He cocked it again. He aimed again. It did not fire. It did not fire the time after that either. By the time that rifle finally went off, 17-year-old Horatio Chappell was already dead. And here is the part that should stop the breath in your chest. Nothing on that rifle was broken. Not one component failed. So how does a rifle powerful enough to kill a polar bear become completely useless without a single mechanical failure? Because most bear defense failures do not begin at the moment a bullet hits an animal. They begin seconds earlier, sometimes hours earlier, sometimes with a decision made while the person was still calm. 15 guns. Every one of them was present when somebody was hurt or killed. Every one of them has also, somewhere else, saved a life. Which means the gun was never the variable. So the question is not which gun kills you. It is colder than that, and once you start asking it, you cannot stop. What actually failed first? Number 15. The camp she was invited to leave. Ovando, Montana is a town of 80 people on the Blackfoot River. On the night of the 5th of July, 2021, a 65-year-old retired nurse named Leah Davis Loken pitched a tent behind the museum there. At 3 in the morning, a grizzly came to her tent and huffed at her head through the fabric. Most people would freeze or tell themselves it was a dream. She did neither. She woke the couple camped beside her, and together they made enough noise to drive the bear off. Then she took the food out of her tent and secured it. Then she took a can of bear spray, pulled the safety tab, and lay down holding it. Her sister was in a hotel 400 yards away, with an open invitation to come sleep there. She stayed. An hour later, the bear came back. The investigation into her death runs 26 pages, written by a board of review from the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee. What they found under her tent is the detail nobody repeats. They found a can of bear spray, nearly empty. The safety tab was inside the tent. The autopsy found her neck was broken and her spinal cord severed, and that she died instantly. Sit with the shape of that, because it is the shape of this entire video. She was not careless. She did 4 correct things in a row, in the dark, at 65 years old, and the chain had already broken 60 minutes earlier, in the one moment when she had all the time in the world and no fear at all. The first link is not equipment. It is a decision, and it gets made while you are still comfortable. So if the chain can break while a person is calm, be very afraid of the links that break when nobody has time to think at all. Number 14. 6 feet is not armed. In 2020, a 22-year-old named Austin Pfeiffer was moose hunting in Wrangell, St. Elias, the largest national park in the United States, an area bigger than Switzerland with almost nobody in it. A grizzly killed him. The National Park Service investigated, and the finding is 1 sentence long, and it is one of the most important sentences in this entire subject. It found that a firearm or other deterrent was not readily available to him. It does not say he was unarmed. It says nothing about caliber or bullets or a gun too small for the animal, not one word about ballistics. It is a fact about geography, where a thing was, relative to where his hands were. And here most people watching quietly correct the record in their own head. Fine, so the lesson is obvious. Wear it on your body. That is reasonable. It is also the conclusion that has been getting people killed for a century, because it treats being armed as something you own, rather than something you occupy. Being armed is a spatial condition. It expires the moment there is more distance between your hand and the gun than there is time between you and the animal. 2 feet of distance is enough to turn an armed man into an unarmed man. So yes, wear it on your body. That is exactly what the man on the glacier in Svalbard did. Number 13. The safety nobody had learned. Go back to that ice. The rifle was in his hands, cocked, aimed, with a bear 10 feet away in the open. Nobody was fumbling in a backpack. Every single thing people tell you to get right, he had already gotten right. So what happened? The inquest went looking, and the answer is not glamorous. The training each member of that expedition team received on the rifle amounted to 4 rounds fired, and basic instruction in handling it. 4. And nobody in that group was properly familiar with how that rifle's safety worked. With it engaged the way it was, working the bolt did not chamber a fresh round, it ejected one. Which means every time Reed cycled that action and pulled the trigger, hoping this time, he was quietly throwing away another cartridge onto the ice. He was not fighting a broken gun, he was fighting a gun doing exactly what it was designed to do, in a state he did not know it was in. That is not a malfunction. It is a misunderstanding. And in the recorded history of bear defense, the second is far more common than the first. That is the difference between a malfunction and a misunderstanding. And in the recorded history of bear defense, the second is far more common than the first. Here is what makes it unbearable. Hand him that rifle on a bench, in daylight, with no bear and no children screaming, and he finds it in 4 seconds. He had every capability required. He simply did not have them at 3 in the morning with a polar bear on a child. So a working gun, in your hands, aimed, is still not enough. Which raises an uglier possibility. What if the thing that fails is not the gun at all? Number 12. The arm the bear chose. An archery hunter named Mike Adams was elk hunting below Sawtell Peak in eastern Idaho. Creeks were running high from storms, loud enough that a bear could not hear him coming. He saw them at 40 feet. A sow grizzly with 3 cubs. This is the part that gets told wrong, in a way that lets everybody watching off the hook. The version you have heard is that his bear spray was on his left side, he was fighting with his right hand, and he never got to it. Which sounds like a man who hung his gear on the wrong hip. A tidy mistake. Somebody else's mistake. Except Mike Adams is left-handed. The bear spray was on his left side, because his left hand was his good hand. He had done the thing you are supposed to do. He had put the most important tool where his best hand could reach it fastest. And then the bear bit that arm. Not the other one. That one. The one his whole system depended on. He was left with his weak hand. With it, he drew a .44 Magnum and fired at point-blank range. Investigators later found no sign the bear had been hit at all. He survived, badly chewed, and walked out to call for help himself. And the lesson is not the one everybody takes. It is not wear your spray on the correct side. He did. The lesson is that a bear gets a vote on which of your arms still works, and it does not consult you. Any tool reachable by only one specific limb is a single point of failure, and one you do not get to choose. All that preparation funneled into one wrist, and the animal removed that wrist in the first half-second. You can be right and still lose, if being right depended on one thing staying intact. Which brings up the question nobody wants to ask out loud. What happens when the hands themselves stop cooperating? Number 11. The gun that got passed. The 1st of September 1995. An expedition ship called the Origo is anchored in the Hinlopen Strait in eastern Svalbard. 5 crew members go ashore, separately from the tourist party, with a flare gun and a .22 caliber pistol. An adult male polar bear finds them. The documentation here is thin, and that deserves saying plainly rather than dressing up. Anyone who tells you exactly where every shot landed is filling in gaps. What is recorded is that the pistol proved ineffective, that one man was killed and another injured, and that police shot the bear afterward. But one detail in that record matters more than the caliber, and almost nobody notices it. The pistol was handed off. In the middle of the attack, the man holding it passed it to somebody else. That would be a strange footnote, except for what happened 23 years later, and 4,000 miles away, in the Teton Wilderness in Wyoming, where a hunting guide being killed by a grizzly threw his pistol to his client. There was nothing left in it. 2 continents, 2 decades apart, different men, different guns, different animals, and the same behavior. Under terror of a certain kind, human beings try to hand the problem to somebody else. Not out of cowardice. Both of those men were doing something brave when it happened. Because the mind at its limit reaches for the oldest solution there is. Give it to someone with better odds. That is not a flaw you fix by buying a bigger gun. It is a flaw you fix by having done the thing so many times your hands stop asking your brain for permission. And the record has a more uncomfortable version of that. Waiting. Number 10. 4 rounds. Go back to that number from the glacier, because it is the loneliest number in this video. 4 rounds. That was the live fire training given to the men responsible for 13 sleeping teenagers in the highest concentration of polar bears on Earth. So, here is a question, and it only works if nobody else can hear the answer. How many rounds have you fired through the gun you actually carry in bear country? Not your range gun, not the one you shot in your 20s. That one, with the ammunition you actually carry, from the holster you actually wear, cold, without setting up first. What matters is how many times you have run that exact sequence in conditions you did not control. For most people who carry seriously, the honest number is closer to 4 than they would ever say out loud. Because a gun is not one skill. It is a chain of small motor tasks, and every one is a place where an untrained hand hesitates. Familiarity does not come in the box. It is the only component on this list that no company on Earth can sell you. Which is exactly why almost nobody talks about it. And even that is not enough, because there is one thing the range cannot simulate, no matter how many rounds you put downrange. Number 9. 3 misses at 5 meters. In 2010, a geologist working in Alaska met a charging grizzly. He was carrying a .357 Magnum. He fired 3 times. He missed with all 3. He was badly mauled, and he lived. The sourcing here is a private compilation of incident reports rather than a peer-reviewed paper, so hold it loosely. But the shape of it repeats through the record. Notice what did not happen. The bullet did not fail to penetrate. The cartridge did not prove too weak. The bear did not shrug off a solid hit. The gun never got the chance to fail because nothing ever touched the animal. 3 shots, at a distance where a man could reach out and touch what he was shooting at, and not one connected. That is not a ballistics story. No chart explains it. No test medium reproduces it. No caliber comparison has ever measured it. That is what raw animal terror does to a human nervous system, the single largest variable in this subject, and the one that has never been for sale. You cannot buy composure. There is no premium version, which is exactly why the industry has spent a century pointing you somewhere else. If you would rather have the honest version of this than the version that sounds good around a fire, that is what this channel does. One of these run all the way down, every week. Subscribe, and stay for the part where the numbers turn on everybody. Because right now, every person watching has arrived at the same conclusion, and it is a completely reasonable one. If a .357 was not enough, bring more gun. Number 8. The rifle that always wins. And you are right. There is no point pretending otherwise for a single sentence, because the pretending is what makes most videos on this subject useless. A 12-gauge slug, or a heavy rifle cartridge, delivers force in a league no handgun on this planet reaches. It has never been close. If a large animal is coming and you get to choose one object to be holding, choose the long gun, every time. So why does almost everybody in bear country carry a pistol instead? The usual answer is that the rifle gets set down, leaned against a tree to field dress an animal, stowed to work a rod, slung to carry a load with both hands. True, and stranger than it sounds, because of something buried in the only peer-reviewed study anyone has done on this. When those researchers modeled what actually predicted whether a person walked away, the variables that made the cut included the species and age class of the bear, whether it charged, whether fish or game meat was present, and the human activity at the time of the encounter. Read those last two again. Meat on the ground, and what the person was physically doing, which means the exact activities that force a rifle out of your hands. Butchering, fishing, hauling, are the same activities that statistically raise the odds you are about to need it. Those are not two problems. That is one problem wearing two hats. The rifle is least available at precisely the moment the data says it is most likely to be needed. So the answer cannot simply be more gun. But most people take it one step further, and that step is the trap. Number 7. The recoil you cannot feel until it matters. If power is the answer, more power must be a better answer. That is the logic, and it is why every gun store in the American West has a shelf of hand cannons, the Scandium Featherweight 44 that weighs nothing and hits like a slammed door, the 500 Magnum that ships with a muzzle brake because the factory knows exactly what it built. And fired well, by somebody who can run them, the big bores work. There is no honest case that they do not. But put two things side by side that you have already seen tonight. 3 misses at spitting distance, from a man who was neither undertrained nor a fool. And 4 rounds of practice, standing between a group of children and a polar bear. Now ask what a cartridge you cannot control actually buys. Not more power. Power was never in short supply. What it costs you is attempts. A gun that punishes you takes something out of your hand every time it fires. The sights, the grip, and in a window measured in seconds, aimed shots are the only currency you have. This is also the honest answer to the revolver capacity argument people have been having online for 30 years. 5 or 6 rounds is not the problem. 5 or 6 rounds you cannot deliver is. Capacity is not a separate link. It is downstream of whether you can bring the gun back onto the animal at all. So the ceiling is not stamped on the barrel. The ceiling is wherever your recovery ends. Which finally brings this to the number that every single argument about bear guns eventually gets settled with, and what is printed directly underneath it. Number 6. The number everybody quotes, and the sentence nobody reads. In 2012, researchers led by Tom Smith of Brigham Young University and Stephen Herrero of the University of Calgary published the only peer-reviewed study that exists on this question. 269 incidents of bear and human conflict involving firearms in Alaska from 1883 to 2009. 444 people, hundreds of bears. And here are the 2 numbers quoted in every bear gun argument on the internet ever since. Handguns stopped the aggressive bear 84% of the time, long guns 76%. Now read what sits directly underneath them. First, the authors themselves state there was no significant difference between them. It is not that handguns edged out long guns, the gap is inside the noise. It is a coin flip wearing a lab coat. Second, and this one is worse, the people carrying firearms suffered the same injury rates in close encounters whether they used their firearms or not. Not lower, the same. And third, the finding that quietly dismantles 30 years of forum arguments. The firearm variables had almost no explanatory power at all. Type of gun, number of shots fired, whether warning shots were used. How many guns were in the group? None of it was useful for predicting who walked away. What was useful was everything this video has been walking through from the start. The species and age class of the animal, whether it charged, what the person was doing, whether there was meat on the ground, the situation, the behavior, the decisions made before anyone touched anything. So do not take from that number that handguns beat rifles. That is not what it says, and saying so is a misuse of the work. Take something larger and far more uncomfortable. The variable that everyone has been arguing about for a generation may simply not be the variable that decides the outcome, which raises a question that should have been asked a long time ago. Why is there only one study? Number 5. The gun nobody wrote down. Think about how strange this is. Millions of people carry a firearm against large animals. Billions of dollars change hands over which one. Entire careers are built on answering the question. And the total body of peer-reviewed science on it is one paper, from one state, ending in 2009. Because in the United States, when a person is mauled or killed by a bear, there is no requirement anywhere that an investigator record what firearm they carried or what was loaded in it. The bigger, comforting numbers on the forums, the ones in the high 90s people quote to end an argument, come from compilations of news reports assembled by private individuals, working alone, with whatever the papers happen to print. That work has value. It is not a data set. The confidence you carry into that country rests on a foundation far thinner than the volume of the people selling it to you. Nobody is measuring this, which means everybody gets to be certain, forever, for free. And that is precisely the condition in which one true story hardens into a rule that gets somebody killed. Number 4. The right tool, in the wrong setting. The 3 most repeated bear gun mistakes in existence are not 3 mistakes. They are 1 mistake in 3 costumes. The first is a 12-gauge loaded with birdshot. A 12-gauge is one of the finest bear guns money can buy. Birdshot is a cloud of tiny pellets, built to kill a duck at 40 yards by spending itself in the first inch of tissue. Against an animal whose vital organs sit behind hide, fat, a slab of shoulder muscle and heavy bone, it is not a weapon. It is a very loud way to change a bear's mood. In a documented Alaska encounter, a hunter put birdshot into a charging brown bear and it did not slow down. What saved him was switching to slugs, the load that should have been in the gun all along. The second is a 10mm carried with the wrong box of ammunition. The 10 is the darling of modern bear country, for real reasons. Capacity, fast follow-ups, manageable recoil. But much of what sits on a sporting goods shelf is loaded soft, in a velocity band that overlaps a far smaller cartridge. The round only earns its reputation with the heavy, flat-nosed, deep-driving loads built by specialists. Same gun, same stamp on the slide, very different animal on the other end. The third is a pump shotgun, not driven all the way back and all the way forward. A pump gun with slugs is about as good as this gets, but under adrenaline, a partial stroke does not chamber the next round, and a person is suddenly holding a very expensive single shot. 3 guns, 3 failures, 1 route. Every one of those people bought the correct tool and ran it in the wrong configuration. And here is the thing worth noticing about this particular link in the chain. It is the only one you can fix in 5 minutes with a credit card, which is exactly why it is the only one the entire industry talks about. But the moment you see that, a worse problem appears. Because when a link cannot be sold, people fill the gap with stories. And the most beloved story in this subject is also the most dangerous one. Number 3. The most dangerous true story in bear country. On the 10th of May 1953, a 63-year-old Cree woman named Bella Twin was hunting small game with her partner, Dave Auger, along an oil exploration cut line south of Slave Lake in northern Alberta. The only gun between them was her single-shot .22 rimfire, repaired and in rough shape. A very large grizzly appeared on the same cut line, walking toward them. They sat down quietly beside a brush pile and hoped it would pass. It kept coming. When the boar was a few yards away, she decided it was riskier not to shoot than to shoot. She raised the rifle and put a .22 long into the side of its head. It dropped. Then she walked up and fired every cartridge she had left, 7 or 8, into its skull, because she had skinned enough animals to know the difference between dead and stunned. That skull held the world record for years, a rabbit rifle, held together with wire, in the hands of a 5-foot grandmother. The story is very probably true, though there are honest disputes about the year and about who fired the shot. And it may be the worst reason on earth to trust a .22. Because look at what was true that day. The bear was not charging. It was walking, unaware. She had time, not 2 seconds, real time, enough to sit down and make a decision and change it. She was inside a few yards. The target was moving at a walk, not accelerating at 35 miles an hour. And she was a lifelong trapper who had taken apart hundreds of animals and knew exactly where a skull is thin. Every single variable in that story was set to the best possible value at the same moment. And that is not a coincidence. That is the explanation. Now set those same variables to what they actually are in a charge. No time, no stillness, no calm. A skull dropping and weaving and closing. Not one of the conditions that made her shot possible survives contact with the thing her story gets used to justify. And this part goes far beyond guns, so take it into everything else in your life. A rare success is not evidence that a strategy works. It is usually evidence of how many things had to go right at once. But a story is memorable, and a probability is not. So it gets repeated until it hardens into a rule, and rules built from exceptional outcomes are how people end up dead doing something that once worked beautifully for somebody else. Which is worth remembering, because the most famous story in modern bear defense is about to do exactly that. Number 2. The 9mm, and what the man who fired it actually said. In August of 2016, an Alaskan guide named Phil Shoemaker was on a salmon stream near the Bakaroff Refuge with 2 clients when a brown bear came for them. Shoemaker had guided brown bear hunters, fishermen, and photographers out of his homestead for 33 years and had never once had to shoot an unwounded bear. That morning he did, with a 9mm pistol. A Smith & Wesson double action only, small and light, loaded with hard-cast bullets, built to drive deep and hold their shape. 3 people walked away without a scratch. He had left his .44 Magnum at home, and the internet has used that story ever since to close an argument. 9mm, Alaskan brown bear, guide with 3 decades of experience. So caliber does not matter. The bullet is everything. Case closed. Here is what gets left out. He did not stop that animal with 1 shot from across a clearing. He fired repeatedly while the bear was standing over his 2 clients. And afterward, in his own writing, Shoemaker described that load as the realistic minimum for protection, where Alaska's large bears are a consideration. He went further. A .357 Magnum with heavier bullets, or a .44 with heavier bullets still, would penetrate deeper and would be preferable. Sit with that. The most cited proof that caliber does not matter comes from a man who never said caliber does not matter. He said it was the floor, and that he would rather have had more. Which leaves the honest answer, and it is more interesting than either side of the argument. Caliber is not meaningless. It is simply last. It sits at the far end of a chain, and everything upstream of it, whether you saw the animal coming, whether the gun was on your body, whether your hand knew the mechanism, whether you had done it enough times, whether you could hold the sights through the recoil, any one of those can make caliber completely irrelevant before your finger touches the trigger. The man who proved a 9mm can work is the same man telling you that was never the point. Number 1. The link that is not a gun at all. There is one more tool, and it does not get a number, because it is not on the list. Bear spray. This is not a gun versus spray argument. That argument is a trap, and it has wasted 20 years of everybody's time. The companion study found bear spray stopped a brown bear's aggression roughly 92% of the time, and about 98% of the people who used it walked away, essentially uninjured. Same researchers, same methods. But the numbers are not the point. The principle underneath them is, look back at what you have seen. A tool can fail. Ask the man on the glacier with a working rifle he could not fire. An arm can fail. Ask Mike Adams, who did it right and lost the limb his plan depended on. A path to the tool can fail. Ask whoever wrote that a firearm was not readily available to Austin Pfeiffer. A decision can fail. Ask the 26 pages written about a nurse in Ovando who did 4 correct things in a row. None of them were unprepared. Everyone had a plan that worked, right up until one specific thing did not. So, preparedness is not a perfect object. Not the correct gun, or the correct bullet, or the correct can on the correct hip. Preparedness is a question about how many things are allowed to fail before you are out of options. That is redundancy, and it is the only defense against a world that chooses which of your links to break. So put it together, because this was never a list of 15 guns. It was one chain, with 6 links, and every story in this video broke at a different one. Detection, whether you knew something was coming, or slept in a place you had already been warned about. Access, whether the tool was inside the distance you had, not the distance you assumed. Deployment, whether your hands knew the machine well enough to run it at 3 in the morning with a child screaming. Familiarity, whether you had done that exact sequence more than 4 times. Terminal effect, whether the projectile could reach anything that mattered. And redundancy, whether losing any one of those 5 still left you with something. Every gun on this list has cost somebody their chances. Every one has also saved somebody's life. The difference, in every documented case, was which link went first. An entire industry is built on what happens after the trigger breaks. The investigation reports keep describing failures that began before a hand ever reached the gun. That is the whole thing, in one breath. So walk your own chain, and not in the abstract. What would have to happen for you to not see it coming? For the tool to be out of reach? For your hands to not know what to do? Then ask the question Mike Adams never got the chance to ask, and answer it honestly. If one arm is gone in the first half second, what is left of your plan? If the answer is nothing, you do not have a system. You have a purchase. I have carried a gun into that country with more confidence than skill, and the only honest reason there is somebody here to say any of this is that the animal that morning had somewhere else to be. And luck is not a chain, it is the absence of one. The people who come back out of Grizzly country are not the ones who found the perfect gun. They are the ones who assumed something would break, and built for it anyway. That is the whole difference, not the caliber stamped on a barrel. Not the number on a box. A person who checked the story before they trusted it, and then checked their own. If that is the kind of hunter you already are, or the kind you decided somewhere in the last half hour to become, then you already belong here. Subscribe, and stand with the people who would rather carry the hard truth than the comfortable one. Because out there, on a glacier or a cut line or a creek bottom in Idaho, the gun was never the whole system. You were.